Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District presents our on-demand video professional development series. In this two-part video series, Seizing the Spring, we will review foundational topics that affect you and your classroom. Think of this video series as a reset of rock-solid classroom practices and offer you an opportunity to reflect on what's going well and what needs attention. In part one of Seizing the Spring, we'll reflect on the current status of your classroom and focus on foundational classroom strategies, such as routines and procedures, classroom organization, and effective transitions. So what is the status of your classroom? As the year has progressed and we're moving toward the spring semester, has the environment changed? Is the atmosphere one in which learning can happen? Or are you finding that you are correcting students more and more often and the class is starting to feel a little chaotic? If this is happening to you, don't worry, it has happened to the best of us, and we need to make a reset. We make three assumptions about students in our classrooms. One assumption we make is that students value the same behavior as we do. We also make an assumption that the students know what they should be doing. We're thinking, well, I taught classroom rules and procedures back in the fall, but I find myself correcting behavior all the time. Perhaps there has been a disconnect and an incongruence in what we think students know and what they really do know. Maybe we need to practice more. Or another assumption we make is that students know how to behave the way we want them to. In other words, that they have the skills they need to communicate and meet our expectations. We must persuade and convince students that good behavior is important and a normal part of our class culture. We do this through our expectations, through our matrix, our procedures, our agreements, our social contracts. And we must practice these and role play, provide preventive prompts as guideposts to remind students of our expectations and the procedures, and of course have consequences when students cannot for any reason meet our expectations. We send a clear and overt message in this class that learning is important and that everyone matters and that good behavior gets you what you need. Another important part of our classroom culture is that students feel valued. This is not a fuzzy, feel-good idea used to synthetically praise students, but it is a recognition that all students, if we want them to belong and grow and feel valued, that they must be treated with dignity and respect. And they need to know that teachers have high expectations of them, but this teacher also believes that the students have the ability to meet their high expectations. Again, this isn't a fuzzy feel-good feeling or fuzzy feel-good idea. This is that there is a community of mutual dignity and respect and a way to communicate in positive ways between the teacher and the students with one another. A routine is a regularly followed action, and a procedure is a specific way of getting something done. Typically, your procedure is your specific way of following a routine. Do you have a solid routine for all the daily activities in your class to ensure that it's a well-run machine? Things like attendance, homework, visitors, laptops, restroom, lining up, paper assignments. Do you have an attention signal, a way that cooperative groups work together, a routine for your centers, what happens when you have a substitute, or independent work? The list goes on and on. From bell to bell, there is a system for interactions and actions in the classroom. We want to make it easier for students to behave, to be clear, explicit, and make good habits. Habits make the right choice easy. Here's a list of some common routines. Make sure that you've practiced with your students. Amateur practice versus professional practice is a real thing. Amateurs can do it right. Professionals can't do it wrong. Though practice can be hard and uninteresting, it still has value. Routines do make life better, not necessarily easier. Pause the video to take a look and reflect on the list versus the routines that you have in your class. Why do routines falter? Well, we start well with good intentions, but we lose heart early on, and we tend to give up or forget. And our perceptions do change over time. So we want to make sure that we check on our routines in routine ways. Consistency is the key to culture. What behavior do I expect to see, and what behavior do I need to teach and reteach? How do I assess when my routines are going well? And what do I do if I see a routine not being performed well, or I don't see it in action? Pause the video and take a look at this list of less common routines. In other words, routines that we might not think about. We always start with a list of the behaviors that we want to see and what behaviors we expect. How are students going to meet our expectations for how we want our class run? So we think about the routines that we want and the procedures that accompany them. But just knowing what we want is not enough. We have to teach each routine using step-by-step procedures, and the students need to practice them. Have what we call a beautification schedule on where you're checking on the routines to make sure not only are they taught well, but you are being consistent with enforcing them and applying them. Don't tell students they can't do this or do that. Show them how to do a particular routine. Routines are expressions of good behavior rather than just a mousetrap to avoid. Here's an example of 3 routines and their accompanying procedures. Notice that they are very specific. Each routine has a procedure in place so that students know exactly what to do and how to do it. These are clear and spell out your expectations of what it looks like to get it right, what it looks like to be successful. Pause the video to take a deeper dive into each one. We say that you just don't tell behavior, you teach behavior with the same gusto that you teach your content. Remember to identify the routines that you want to see, communicate in detail your expectations, practice those routines until everyone can do them, reinforce, maintain, and patrol routines constantly. Using the principles of learning when teaching routines will help you teach them in a structured and controlled way and use them to your advantage. We want students to be independently behaved, more powerful, and more self-disciplined. We are building good habits and preparing students for the next challenge. To create habits, we repeat the action several times. Repetition embeds what is repeated when it's practiced correctly. Be sure to give clear reminders to perform the behavior well and give reinforcers to repeat the behavior. Now, it starts extrinsically and drives toward extrinsic motivation. When students begin to see the value, the good things they are doing. In our first section, we talked about the importance of classroom procedures and routines and making it part of your class culture that students value behaving well in your class. In this next section, we're going to move on to classroom organization. Is your classroom organized for learners, ensuring ownership, active engagement, independence, responsibility, and provide a caring environment where materials and equipment are ready, planning for lessons is adequate, desks are clean and organized, and everything has a place and everyone takes part of the process? Is the classroom organized? Is it clean and clutter-free? Is it functional? Are the materials and equipment valued and cared for? This is not the sole responsibility of you as the teacher to take care of this environment and this organization. We want to make sure that we're teaching students the skills in which they can take care and take ownership of the learning environment as well. In our classroom space, we want to send the message that you care about the learning environment and therefore students care about the learning environment. You provide well-organized supplies and materials for students, and they make sure they help maintain the organization. But we have to take time to teach students how to put things away and how to keep organized. And we do that by modeling behavior that, hey, we're going to pay attention to the neatness and organization of this classroom. We're going to attend to it, and we're going to make sure that everything always is in its place. That's a clear message to students. Whether you have seats in rows or you group them in partners or in groups of 3 or 4, We want to make sure that the classroom is set up for students so that when they walk in, they recognize that there is an order to the classroom. So having an organized classroom sends a clear message that we care about the classroom environment. Another way that we can help students is to make sure we have orderly and organized transitions. There are essentially three types of transitions: entering the class and taking a seat, switching from one academic activity to another, and exiting the class. Like academics, transitions must be taught through explicit explanation, providing clear models, rehearsing and practicing, and constantly reviewing. A good transition is made up of several steps. First, secure the student's attention. We'll talk about some good attention getters in just a second. Prompt them by providing an explanation for the procedure. You can say something like, "In a moment, we will return to our desks and take out our history books." Prepare students for the signal to start. You can say something like, "When I say smooth, you'll quietly proceed." Initiate the transition by using your word. In this case, it was smooth. And then observe. Watch to make sure that all the students are complying. Provide reinforcements when students are doing it well, and redirection when students need help. If I'm teaching my students a particular subject or content, there's lots of things I want to make sure that I provide for my students to create a good lesson. I'm going to give them explicit explanations of the topic, provide clear models and visuals, ample time for rehearsal and practice, and of course, I'm going to review often. I'm going to do the same for my routines and procedures and transitions. Let's think about the transition of entering the class. Some things that I want to think about are, will my students line up outside the door, or can they enter at their own pace? When they walk in, is there an assigned seat? And is there an activity for them to get started on? What will my students do with their backpack, laptop, jacket, and lunch kits? And what will they do while I take attendance? And I'm going to make sure that each one of those ideas, my students are given explicit instructions, clear models, lots of visuals, and time to practice and review. The same goes for exiting the class. I'm going to think about, do I have a call to attention before the bell to make sure my students are aware that the bell is about to ring? Can students dismiss themselves? Do I call tables to exit? Do students line up at the door? And is there an exit ticket to complete? So I want to think about these things and provide the instruction for my students to do them well. And I'm not going to wait until the day of 5 minutes before the bell rings to talk about this exit procedure. I'm going to create a lesson for them so that we can fully explain the procedure for exiting the room, practice it so that they can get it right when the time comes and the bell's about to ring. Be effective with your attention getters. That's the first step in a transition, is getting the students' attention. Always find a place in the room, the same place that you always call attention each time. This is your call to attention spot. This is a very effective way to make sure students know that you're about to get their attention. Stop and stand still and use your attention getter. And wait. Wait for students to meet your expectations. When you have everyone's attention, when you have everyone's eyes looking on you, pencils are down, voices at zero, inspect and send a message, hey, to students. I'm looking to make sure that everyone's looking at me and everyone's quiet. And then you can begin your message to your students. Pause the video here for some examples of some fun attention getters. The internet is loaded with lots of examples. Now let's talk about when it goes wrong. Despite using different techniques and incorporating attention getters into lessons, there still may be instances where students are not responding to them. In these cases, it's important to reflect on why the attention getter may not be working and make necessary adjustments. As an educator, it's important to continuously assess and adapt your teaching methods to ensure that they are effective for all students. If one attention getter isn't working, try a different one or adjust your delivery. In summarizing our learning for today, we really can think about what can we put into play tomorrow. Is it just a slight attention to the routines and procedures and shoring those up with practice with our students? Perhaps turning our attention to how our classroom is organized, sending that clear message that organization matters in this classroom? Or working on your transitions as students enter or leave the classroom? Working on having an effective attention getter? We encourage you to implement the strategies from this video to enhance your classroom management. Thank you for taking the time to review our professional development on demand. Up next, Season the Spring, Part 2.